a survey of Europe's competitiveness in international markets, the challenges we face as European companies on international markets, and also making some policy recommendations as to what should be done to achieve those objectives better. And so I'd like to present some of the preliminary findings of that to you this morning. First, I should mention that in assessing Europe's competitiveness on international markets, what we have used as a measure is our share of total exports. This allows for, first of all, a direct comparison with our other major trading competitors in global markets, and it also takes account of the fact that world trade is growing very dramatically every year, and so we have a constant measure which we think is a good way to look at that figure. So, in this graph, we see Europe's market share in total world exports. The good news is that until 2004, Europe was maintaining a fairly constant position of around 20% of world exports. The bad news, however, is that since that time, Europe has experienced a very significant decline. Our figures go up to 2006, and between 2004 and 2006, you can see that our share falls from 20.3% in 2004 to 18.3% in 2006. This is a more significant reduction than it might even seem when you consider that this is in fact a 10% drop in our world market share in just 2 years. But let's look at some key markets for Europe. This graph shows you the major markets for European Union exports, and you can see that apart from Switzerland, our key partners are the United States, Russia, and China. In terms of market share in these countries, there is again good news and bad news. The good news is that absolute exports, so our total volume of exports, is increasing by 21%, for example, in the United States between 2001 and 2006. However, when we come to look at market share, the news is more concerning in that in all three markets, our market share is falling, which this means that we are not capitalizing fully on the growth of imports into those markets, and we are losing ground to other countries and regions. In Russia and the US, China is a major factor there. So in Russia, the fall is from 49% of Russian imports in 2005 to 43.5% in 2007. In China, the fall is from 13.8% to 11.4% in 2006. And there's a slightly less fall in the US market. So looking at sectors, services as a whole, it should be said, is the largest single area of EU exports at about 27%, and in fact our market share there is fairly stable. But if we look at industrial sectors, the picture is more mixed. In sectors such as automotive and chemicals, Europe appears to be holding up very well, as you can see from the top two lines in the graph. Autos, for instance, has basically remained stable, losing about 0.1% of market share from 2000 to 2006. But for other sectors, and here if you look at the metals sector, electronics or textiles, you can see that the picture is certainly a little bit more worrying. For example, the European electronics sector, its share of global exports was reduced by 11% between 2000 and 2006. So that's a very dramatic fall in real terms. Looking at member states, we can see that there's a considerable variation between their performance. Germany, as we are no doubt aware, is doing extremely well, and it's managed to maintain its share of world exports at about 9% in a consistent period over both from 2000 to 2006. Slovakia is not shown on this graph, but it's also in an extremely good position. As a case study, we've taken these countries, by the way, we've chosen about 4 countries for case studies. So Slovakia is doing very well. Its exports, which are largely within the EU, have gone up by about 20% per year from 2000 to 2006. And the interesting point about that to mention is that apart from its competitive advantages in terms of low labour costs and a reduced tax burden, Slovakia has benefited from Germany's expansion by being an export platform for German companies and taking part in the German export success internationally. France and Italy, by contrast, are not doing so well. They're having difficulties on world markets. As you can see here, there's a gradual decline in French market share and also in Italian market share, but they're also having trouble within the EU, where French exports have fallen by about 12.6% in 2006, and Italian exports have fallen by about 35 percentage points in terms of market share on the EU. So you can see from all of this that though the EU begins from a fairly strong position in terms of our position on world markets and our export competitiveness, there are some fairly worrying signs on the horizon. What then are the causes for these difficulties? The first that we would like to point out is uneven implementation of the European Union's Lisbon agenda. We'll hear more about this later, but just to point out a few points. First of all, the EU's internal market is one area where we are lacking implementation at European level. We are all aware of the difficulties in integrating the European Union services market, but there are also many barriers that remain to free trade in goods within the European Union. About 50% of EU manufactured goods are not subject to technical harmonisation at European level, and though there are European rules which in theory guarantee free passage for such goods all across the European Union, these rules are routinely not respected, leading to increased costs for companies wishing to export across Europe and hampering the economies of scale that we should be benefiting from having such a large market in the European Union. In addition, the EU is not meeting its targets for innovation. Governments committed in 2000 to raise research and development spending to 3% of gross domestic product by 2010, and the current figure stands at about 1.8%. This efficiency is borne out by real figures when you look at the fact that in terms of new technological patents per head of population, Europe is considerably behind its competitors in the US and Japan. Europe registers about 53 patents for every million inhabitants. The figure in the US is 173 patents, and the figure in Japan is 211. So there's a considerable difference there. The last area of the Lisbon strategy where we think there should be better implementation is unemployment rates. Only 65% of the EU's potentially employable population is employed, compared with 71% in the US. And what this means is that even in sectors where the European Union companies are extremely competitive and where there is huge demand for their exports, we have difficulty keeping up with that demand because we can't employ enough people to follow. The second area of difficulty is on the overall burden of EU regulation on European companies. There are a variety of areas which would be highlighted here, but to take one that's topical and very important, the EU strategy on climate change. The EU has set a target of 20%